And now I'm going to turn your attention over to our next guest. Timothy Kramer, CEO of CNIC Funds, is with us, and we're going to be talking all about electricity. Timothy, thank you so much for being with us. This is your wheelhouse, and we want to know the very latest electricity usage, an extremely important topic. But what are some themes that you are watching for 2024?
Oh, yeah. So right now, you can't pick up the paper without finding something that talks about electricity or the electrification of America. And so what we think right now, kind of our major thesis, is that demand for electricity in the United States is grossly understated. So a couple of things to support that would be, if you take a look at AI. If you do a Google search takes approximately 1 watt of electricity. If you do the exact same search in AI, it takes about 100 watts, but it takes about 1,000 watts to train that. So we think people are kind of missing how much AI is going to contribute to the demand for the U.S. If you take a look at chips, I mean, Moore's law says that efficiency doubles every 2 years. But when you take a look at the actual chips that we're using right now, these new generation chips use like 4 to 5 times more electricity because they're graphics intensive, parallel computing, and they got to handle all these AI needs. If you take a look at data centers, there's lots of news right now about data centers. In 2022, data centers in the U.S. used about 2.5% of all electricity in the U.S. By 2027, that number is going to jump to about 10%. Electric cars in 2022, they used about 1% of electricity demand for the country, and that's supposed to be 5% in 2030 and about 10% in 2035. So if you just weather normalize the overall electricity consumption in the U.S., depending upon the region, it's gone up between like 3 to 10%. And then when you add these other factors on top of that, we just think that demand is grossly understated right now.
So you certainly painted the picture with some great facts showing the growth and demand, that demand is understated, supply is overstated, that we just don't necessarily, we may not necessarily be ready for all of this. Is that right? I mean, and then it moves to your funds and how you would navigate through this, but that's part of it too, is that we just aren't ready for a lot of the demand. I mean, I don't want to put some catastrophic ideas here, but there is some concern, right?
Absolutely concern, and you touch on some good points. And the first one is this past December, January, and February, that was the mildest winter we've had since 1893. It was a La Nina event. I'm sorry, an El Nino event, excuse me. And we had an El Nino event the previous winter also. So the odds of like back-to-back El Ninos are like 9%. And so that mild weather, it just masks what these demand and supply issues are. What happens is typically when you got an El Nino event like that, the summer usually is what's called a La Nina event, which is a hotter and drier summer. And a lot of the commercially available weather forecasts, they came out with their predictions for this summer. And so right now, you're looking at June, July, and August for the United States, setting all-time records for cooling degree days. Again, it's just a forecast or a prediction, but what you've seen, the supply-demand imbalance, which we think was masked by the mild winter, we think you're going to see the system stress this summer, and this could create some.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about the funds and tell me a little bit about what goes into these funds. I know you had one that you were watching, exposure offered by AMPD. So people can understand the names and the materials and things that go in here. What is it that we need to make electricity happen, right?
Sure. So in terms of funds and in terms of investors gaining exposure to this, right now, the only product that's out there is AMPD. That's our product. And what it does is there are electricity futures that trade on ICE, the Intercontinental Exchange. So just like you can buy futures contracts for gold, oil, corn, things like that, you can buy futures on electricity contracts. So what our ETF does is it takes a national weighted average of these futures prices and packages them up and gives you exposure via the ETF. So if you wanted to get exposure to electricity as an underlying commodity, this is the only way to get it right now with AMPD.
That's interesting. ICE obviously owns New York Stock Exchange as well. When you talk about the commodities space, do you watch everything else in commodities? Anything standing out to you thus far in 2024? Anything jumping out at you that you'd care to share?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely keep an eye on pretty much all of the energy commodities. The one that I think most people are talking about right now is natural gas. Natural gas started out, I guess it was December, was around $6 the beginning of December, and now it's sub $2 right now. And so a lot of people are taking a look at what that impact is and how that may manifest itself over in the electricity space. That's kind of like the only really interesting other energy space thing we're seeing right now would be what the effect of natural gas would be. And if you're going to see this weather materialize in the summer, if you're going to see more of a gas burn for gas-fired power generation.
Yeah, and it was interesting when you said a Google search 1 watt, AI search 100 watts, and it takes 1,000 watts to train the search. By the way, thank you for providing those for me, because it really paints the picture of what's needed. Maybe you heard our last conversation about solar and, that sort of venue as well, because basically you're going to need different routes. As you noted, we're not going to have the electricity for EVs. I mean, they're pushing for everybody to get an EV car. We saw in California that didn't go so well.
Right. So with respect to solar, with solar and wind, those renewables are not dispatchable, meaning that you can't control the output. So on a large basis, what happens is if you've got, a cloud shows up and the solar's not there or the wind doesn't show up, you still need to have a certain amount of dispatchable generation or generation where you can control the output. And so the variability just kind of adds to the supply demand imbalance. It adds to the volatility. It adds to the issues that you're looking at here. So there is a place for renewables. And we do think that there are multiple routes that you need to go, like you talked about. The U.S. has a goal of being 85% renewable at 2030 and 100% carbon-free by 2035. But again, you're starting to see a lot of those things get walked back and delayed just because of the reliability issues.
Yeah, I mean, and when people started to worry about the economy or they started to worry about war, guess what was totally forgotten, right? We went right back to the days of old. I mean, nobody was focusing on those types of things at that moment. Tell me some of these quotes, Buffett, Musk, some thoughts that really resonate with you maybe or that stand out to you.
Oh, sure. So Warren Buffett, I guess 2 weeks ago, was on X or Twitter, whatever they call it these days. And he was saying that U.S. power consumption is greatly understated. And he owns a few utilities, via Berkshire. And so he's kind of got his finger on the pulse, and what he's seeing, I think, is a really good indication of that. Elon Musk was in the paper, I guess, maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago, and he was saying, whatever you think power consumption is going to be, multiply it by 4, and you're still understating it. And then recently, EQT, the CEO of this natural gas company, they came out this week and they said, look, we see a huge electricity demand and we need to build more gas pipelines and we need to build more gas plants simply because of these reliability issues and these demand issues. So we're still thinking that the supply-demand equation, it's just not balanced, and it's going to be an interesting summer if that heat actually shows up.
It's interesting because as we get into the summer driving season and we're seeing oil creeping higher, but to your point, as far as electricity demand, I mean, people have heated driveways now. I mean, I think that we talk about Americans' behavior, right? And any lights or things or, bells and whistles, I mean, everybody's on board for everything.
Yes, exactly. And not only with driving, but you're seeing there's a lot of different communities right now that are basically prohibiting, I guess the rule they call it is no gas stoves. What they're really saying is you cannot hook up any new residential or commercial to the gas infrastructure. They want it to all be electric. So there's just so many other things and so many small things that when you add them up in aggregate, just create a really big supply-demand imbalance.
And last but not least, our place in the global picture. I mean, you did talk about back-to-back winters that were particularly warm. I mean, we had Vail Resorts coming out and noting that. My own ski slope here in the Catskills had very little snow. But in the global picture of what we need here in the United States of America, do we have it? Can we? You said demand is grossly understated and supply overstated. What do we need to do to stay our national security, to stay as a front runner, et cetera, Timothy?
Well, what you're seeing right now is Europe was kind of leading the charge in terms of being green and going for, totally renewable generation. And now you're starting to see some places like the UK came out last week and said, yeah, we're not going to retire coal and natural gas as fast as we said we are because we need them for reliability issues. So what I think you're going to see is a delay of this shift towards when we're going to try to be 100% carbon-free generation. I think that's going to get pushed back a little bit. And I also think that the U.S. is going to need to reconsider nuclear generation and how they feel about that being a carbon-free source.
Yeah, and we've been hearing more and more about that as well. I mean, it's not the first time I'm hearing that. I think you're on point with that. And we'll keep an eye on AMPD, to your point, so we can look at those electricity futures. Timothy Kramer, CEO of CNIC Funds. Thank you, Timothy.